54,192 dead, 45,295 injured, 15,000 people missing, and 13.6 million displaced, and more than a year of conflict. These are the numbers of the Ukrainian conflict. These are the numbers that have resulted from the loss of men, women, and children on the battlefields of Ukraine. And since February 24th of 2022, we have seen this conflict continue on with its violent ways. So when asked the question, should NATO members increase its military aid to Ukraine, I can only answer by saying yes, we must increase military aid to Ukraine. Now, answering this question with my three main areas of analysis. First, we can see that NATO members must increase military aid to Ukraine. Secondly, we will take a look at how this is happening in the status quo. Third, we will look at how the status quo and our aid is going to impact the battlegrounds of Ukraine. Now let's move on to our first area of analysis, where we can see that it is a must for NATO members to increase military aid to Ukraine. Now we can look to time March 2014 of 2022, where they report that, quote, Ukraine needs more military aid from NATO and fast. They outlined three main areas on where we need to increase our aid to Ukraine. First, that we need to increase intelligence for the Ukrainians. Now, when we look to the battlefields of Ukraine right now, they don't have much intelligence to go off of. So when they're going out to the battlefields, they have a blindfold on. The Ukrainians don't know where the Russians are at, and the Russians don't know where the Ukrainians are at. Now, with increased intelligence in the Ukrainian battlefields, with NATO members' military aid, we will see that Ukrainians will be able to fight more effectively and swiftly with efficiency. Now, secondly, they say that we, NATO members, must increase the cybersecurity and overwatch over Ukrainians. Now, when we can see in the status quo that hundreds of thousands of cyber attacks are happening every single day, it is only a matter, it only makes sense for the NATO members to increase its military and help the Ukrainians combat these cyber attacks. Now, they outline their third area of analysis, where we can see where they say that they need to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Now, what this will do is that with a no-fly zone in Ukraine, this will have immediate positive impacts on the Ukrainian battlefields for the Ukrainians. Now, let's look to Atlantic Council on October 6th of 2022, where they say that the Ukrainian top NATO priority should be weapons and not fast-track membership. They further this article by saying that, quote, Zelensky should instead press NATO members to provide Ukraine with weapons and needs to fight the Russians. Now, when we can see that the Atlantic Council is urging Zelensky to pressure NATO for more weapons, it is NATO's part to increase its weapons supply to Ukraine and military aid to Ukraine overall. Now, when we can see that it is an urgency for Zelensky to pressure NATO to provide more military aid and weapons, it is also on NATO's part to increase its military aid and weapons. Now, let's take a deeper dive on what this military aid is, which leads me into my second area of analysis, where we can see how this is happening in the status quo. Now, let's look to NPR in January of 2023, where they pointed that, quote, Germany agreed to send its Leopard tanks to Ukraine after weeks of pressure. Now, in this article, they further by saying that after weeks of intense pressure from allies, Germany has agreed to allow a state-of-the-art Leopard 2 tanks to be donated to Ukraine in a marked shift to his leader reluctant in increasing military support to help the country fight the Russians. Now, when we can see in the status quo that Germany, one of the largest members of NATO, are sending its state-of-the-art Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, we can see that this is an action of Germany, a NATO member of military aid, and we can see that this is happening in the status quo, and other countries must follow Germany's actions and increase their military aid to Ukraine. Now, let's look to what the United States did. According to Reuters in January of 2023, they state that, quote, in change of course, U.S. agreed to send 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Now, when we can see that two of major NATO members are sending overall 45 tanks to Ukraine, This will have positive impacts on the Ukrainian battlefields. This will be a game changer, and this will change the tides of war. Now, let's look into my third area analysis where we will explore the impacts these tanks will have on the Ukrainian battlefields. Now, we can look to NPR on January 28th of 2023, they point out that even after centuries, a tank plays a major role in war. He further by saying, quote, it could be a game changer, and even at a certain number will still help. When Germany and the US are sending 45 tanks of the 300 that Ukraine needs to win this war, and when NPR is specifically pointing out a certain number of tanks will help, when Ukrainians have the 300 tanks that they need to win the war, this will be a game changer in the Ukrainian battlefields. Even in the status quo, when Germany and the US are sending 45 tanks to Ukraine, it's still a game changer. We don't know what to expect with the 300 tanks, but positive change on the battlefields. Now, let's look to CFR on January 25th of 2023, where they point out Germany and U.S. tanks will be critical in Ukraine's next phase against Russia. Now, they further in this article by saying the main battle tanks that the U.S. and Germany have agreed to provide Ukraine will help its forces punch through Russian artillery and retake lost territory. Now, when we are seeing the status quo, when Ukraine has these 45 battle tanks, it is a critical part of critical strategy in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. And even with the 45 tanks of the 300, it will be able to help the Ukrainians take back lost territories from Russia. And even after centuries of warfare, we're still going to see the positive impacts of these tanks. Now, today we explore my three main areas of analysis and answering the questions of should NATO members increase the military aid to Ukraine. Now, I answered this question by saying yes. NATO members must increase military aid to Ukraine. By saying that first, it must happen for the Ukrainians because it is a must. Secondly, we looked at how this is happening in the status quo with Germany and the U.S. sending combined 45 tanks. Lastly, we looked at how these 45 tanks will impact and how this will be a game changer and a critical part of the Ukrainians. Now, hopefully, NATO members will increase its military aid to Ukraine, and these 13.6 million displaced people will be able to go back to their homes in a time of peace.